This is about buildings and cities.
Oh, yeah, you're listening to a podcast about buildings and cities. You rejoin us for an ongoing discussion of some of Soane's assorted urban and less urban buildings. Buildings for the city and buildings for institutions. Things we hadn't talked about and we kind of feel obliged. Yeah. So, this one actually is not really in the city. We're looking at this quite nice sort of idealised Gandhi illustration of Dulwich Picture Gallery, which at the time was, I think, in a rather rural setting, although immediately next to some existing buildings.
I think you could probably get there and back in a day, but it wouldn't leave you much time on site.
There was a guy called Francis Bourgeois,
who was rich and
an artist
of
modest talent. Yes.
Yes, he would say professional. Other people would say amateur.
And there was Dulwich College.
Long-term posh school. Been there since the 16th century, I think.
There were some almshouses on site.
There were a few, yes.
Yeah. It's a sort of slightly weird commission because there's a commission both for a mausoleum, familiar story, and also for a kind of actual programme for living people. Is sort of semi to kind of cohabit with and surround it.
It's a 3-part thing which makes up, I would say, a mortuary complex. The actual tomb and mausoleum, almshouses, which is a very historic thing to do as a gift to the city on death, and sometimes I think would feature, monuments to the person who died to provide them.
The benefactor.
Yes. And a more modern idea, which is a public art gallery. Bourgeois' idea was that this would be the National Gallery of England, or Britain, as it then was. Slightly curiously situated in Dulwich. We have mentioned a lot how Soane is in a period which is on the cusp of the modern, in terms of building type, as in before his time, we exist really in a timeless world of the same building types.
Yeah.
They're the same building types in the Roman city as there are in the 17th century European city, broadly.
A lot more Christian churches.
The style of the temples is a bit different, but broadly the same sorts of things.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, it's a city of office blocks and railway stations and all sorts of things. And this feels like a hybrid mortuary complex for the new and old era. Nowadays, people die and give money and have their names on art galleries all the time. That's like a completely normal thing to do.
Yes.
And before this time, almshousing was totally bulk standard, and this is a hybrid complex.
Yeah.
And it also exists in a architectural style that was redolent of death, as most of Soane's buildings are.
People have stopped endowing complexes of almshouses, haven't they?
Yeah, I would say this is pretty near the end.
Yeah. They don't do that anymore.
I suppose there was the big, in the late 19th century, there were the big, people would sort of set up
the Guinnesses and Peabodys and various sort of Quakers who'd done appalling things to make enormous amounts of money and then wanted to... wondering what to do with it all.
Yes. That sort of thing. But then council housing overtook that. Anyway, that's rather by the by. Yeah. This was an image of which is, in fact, a clip of a collage of different images. And this was the ideal scheme, which I think Soane in his description calls the scheme as agreed.
Yes.
Or something of that nature.
Yeah.
This is what he wanted to do.
They have these quite nice little essays on the Soane Collection website, and they narrate various different bits. There's a point where the mausoleum switches from one side of the building to the other, and there is no very clear reason for why this happens, but it does. It kind of flips around.
So do you want to? Should we describe this, or should we describe how the project was? The whole project was at that time. The initial plan, which this is an image of, was that there was going to be a kind of new quad, or at least 3 sides of one, with connecting buildings to to the college as well. So one side would be the college as is, with an arcade connecting it, and then there would be the building more or less where it is now, although slightly different in nature, and then another arm
to kind of create
a kind of courtyard. The building as it is built is a long block, and now it has got the mausoleum on the back, which at times was on the front. When it switched over, he also wanted another block on the front, which wasn't built. There is now one there. I don't know how much, which was built later. I don't know whether or not that's the scheme that he wanted or not, but he did certainly want things there. He wanted an arcade across the front, which then became a blind arcade. And in fact, that left the front, as it was finished in his lifetime, very blank and blind, like a blind arcade with 2 blocks on the end, with also blind windows. Very, very blank. The central part of the image you see here was built subsequently. So originally, that arcade just had a door in the central provision, and that went into the galleries. And then at the back, there were small almshouses, which are all connected into this block with windows, with the mausoleum in the middle of them, which also got value engineered a couple of times, but is a rectangle on the outside with decoration, a coloured, like amber-coloured light box on top, with inside a circle of columns in a circular space. Lots of urns, etc.
Yes. I mean, to say something about the actual gallery, the kind of central idea is this sort of enfilade of 5 gallery spaces, all in a row. And originally, the design was much more minimal. You kind of just had a door straight off the street, well, not actually a street, out of a courtyard or whatever, into the middle of these 5 galleries. And you just had the 5 galleries. Over time, they've kind of taken over the almshouses, also filled in, this arcade got filled in, and so there are now kind of more sort of ancillary spaces and other bits around it. But originally it was this very simple run of 5 galleries in a row, all of them top lit, no windows on the outside. Dulwich say that this is kind of the invention of the sort of modern form of the art gallery, which I'm not sure if that is actually true or not, but it's definitely recognisably that kind of
I think that
type.
top lit galleries was already an ideal of the period.
Because isn't the Long Gallery in the Louvre earlier than this? Which is like...
I mean, that would definitely be earlier, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But like it's very recognisably the kind of classic form of what a gallery for looking at art is like.
If you look at... There's a difference between... So they greatly increased the amount of space given over to displaying the paintings, but they haven't actually increased the number of paintings. So they've just ended up with the paintings being more spread out on the walls. There are some paintings in there.
Yeah, it's worth a visit. Oh, they also have quite good...
They have good shows.
Yeah.
They certainly had a good run of shows a while ago.
Yeah, they have quite fun little sort of temporary exhibition. He's working in this very bricky, very abstract style on the outside. It does seem like it was originally meant to be a bit more kind of articulated, a bit more monumental, a bit more sort of flavoured with this kind of imagination of the classical cemetery language.
Yes, although it still has elements that are very blank and geometric, just more detailed. And if we go through those, you can see that was the front elevation as built, which is a stark elevation. It's just these 2 towers and this long arcade, and it's a very blank, austere facade. It's curious. So I think now, they've moved the front of the building forward. They've added a lobby, and they've taken over the almshouses at the back.
So this is the plan before the switch. Was that you have the run of 5 galleries, 3 square ones and 2 rectangular ones, and have the kind of mausoleum standing proud of it, and the almshouses on the other side. For some reason which is not clearly documented, they switched it round so that the mausoleum and what were then the almshouses are kind of it's sort of buried in among them. Yeah,
which to me gives prominence to the interior of the mausoleum at the expense of the exterior.
Yeah.
So when you go in, the interior of the mausoleum is right in front of you. But the exterior now, you can only see it by going around the back of the building, which feels odd.
And then the mausoleum it's this funny space with, it's actually got three, because it's got bourgeois and it's also got a couple of other people in it. Although
Isn't
how
there
much...
an empty sarcophagus?
Maybe. I'm not sure how much they're in. Because also, wasn't it blown up or something?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, I think it may have been blown up in the war and then been put back together. So who's actually in what sarcophagus, I think, is anyone's guess. It has this kind of yellow glass lantern, which is all...
that's very much the colour, like it's very amber.
Yeah, it feels amazing, intensely sort of vivid and strange. His sense of how much you could kind of create this sort of concentrated and unearthly feeling through coloured light, I think, he had a real understanding of that. And it does, I don't know, it doesn't necessarily make it feel like any particular place, but it makes it feel like I guess it's a little bit like kind of dusk light or something, but like a kind of hyper-concentrated, romantic sort of heightening of that.
It makes the air feel thick,
like
treacle, or the whole thing is set in amber. Something where things move slowly or are stuck. Very curious, yes.
There's a watercolour drawing of it, which
fails to get the light, really. And
doesn't
also
get the
doesn't quite look like that.
Yeah, I think it's a bit different. And also it looks much bigger, as they always do.
Yeah, it's small.
It's very small, yeah. The little kind of round vestibule to it is really, really small and kind of concentrated. I guess it's quite successful as a gallery. Like, it isn't. They are nice gallery spaces, and they feel...
Yeah, the lighting works.
Kind of comfortable, cosy. The light works. They're a good place for looking at the art. It is in Dulwich.
The exterior is interesting in that it is so blank still. It feels like a ziggurat or something. It has no articulation.
Yeah, well, you have the barest sense of these kind of pilasters or something. But
the articulation is all in sort of stepping forward and back of the brick.
Yeah, but it is, just super bricky with, again, what do these feel like? Kind of aqueducts or the sort of blind arches on the side of a railway station or something, but in fact, of course, before any of that. It's cool, and it still exists, which is nice, and it's, and it does, it basically works. Somehow, it's not really the way that I imagine the lost schemes, though.
So I think part of the reason I'm slowed down in commenting on this is that I feel on very unsafe ground knowing what he intended, what the building that was actually built by him was, and what has been subsequently changed, because it's been extensively changed. There was an idea for something that was slightly grander, but still quite austere and closed, something which had the mortuary, the mausoleum, the dead bit is more kind of central to the scheme, and the scheme is part of a kind of overall set of buildings. Whereas now, the interesting things about it is a discrete gallery. The closeness works well as a gallery. It makes it feel like a box, like a treasured box. The outside is strong and defensive, like the Bank of England, and then the inside is polished and top-lit and enclosed, so that you aren't distracted by any communication with the world beyond. The spaces kind of all connect to each other across this cross-axis, the axis from entrance to the mausoleum, and the enfilade of 5 rooms.
Yeah.
Which are of 2 sizes, squares and long.
Yeah.
And the set of arches feels Roman.
Yeah.
To a degree. I mean, now it feels kind of like the top of the Salisbury wing or whatever. But it feels like something you get in a Roman bath or something like that, this succession of big round arches. But it's very difficult to really know if what you're seeing is sewn or not. Until researching this, I obviously was judging it as if it was a sewn building, and it is. But it really slows down wanting to kind of put a really decisive idea of something or really draw a conclusion.
Yeah. Because
you're suddenly seeing all of these alternatives.
Yeah, there's a lot of options again.
And how much it got changed and blown about. And then it becomes very slippery where to judge his intent once you start seeing all of this design process work.
Yeah.
And I found that with very many of them. It's very... he's producing so many alternatives. Things have been mucked about with so much. There's a lovely set of construction drawings, again. Yeah. Some of the really nicest ones.
Yeah. There's often this funny little stove in the somewhere in the picture, which apparently I think is people melting down lead. I think it's plumbers maybe melting a bit of lead to do their join the pipes or something like that.
If we go back to that image,
yeah.
So the end wall is nearly blind and it's just got these vertical, but it does have a couple of windows.
Yeah.
The arcade is blind, but the two blocks on the end are sort of open.
There's a lovely image of them putting in all of the, what I guess is the lath for the plaster above. I guess this is a bit of the mausoleum.
Do you think that's the plaster drying on the lath?
Oh, maybe, yeah. Really beautiful. And then there's quite a famous one of this chap in his little hat sitting on underneath the ladder working on a sketch.
One of the students.
Quite beautiful. Yeah, but I don't know. In a way, it's hard to know how much to say about it. It's a lovely building and very much worth a visit.
There are two buildings of his that are really visited.
Yeah.
His museum.
Yeah.
And it's very unlike that. It's tidy and ordered and clear, whereas his house museum is super abundant.
I guess it's very much he does have this kind of pragmatic mode with these kind of simple forms in brick, and we're going to see more of those in his churches as well. So there is a series of, there are 3 churches that he built and one that he didn't build. The built ones are all late works from the 1820s. So there's a one of Gandhi's drawings illustrating all of his church designs together, and he has 3 of the ones in the foreground are different versions for the same project, which is All Saints Marylebone. Actually, his kind of first really interesting church design is this unbuilt one for Tyringham, which is a country house we talked about on the country house episode, and that is a triangular church. We're back in triangle mode. How does this work? This triangle, I guess it's not really intended for any kind of events. It's a kind of for commemoration. So
yes, although there is a sort of scheme of how it theoretically could work. You just you can't fit a very large congregation.
Yeah,
it's triangular in plan with rounded point corners, a 4-column portico on the 3 long sides. You go through one side with the altar facing you in a corner, and in the 2 other corners are sort of alcoves for seating, which are like boxes. So you could kind of accommodate what would now be a quite reasonable congregation of 12.
Healthy, yes.
Or possibly a little more than that. But I think it was a mausoleum for someone, really. Or perhaps it was just a pavilion in the garden. Oh, well, there you go. You can see how it's being used there.
So this is a watercolour for looking from inside one of the points. And you've got some ladies sitting in
This
kind
is
of
a very strange perspective. What is going on?
This is another impossible perspective, but it shows what an interesting space it is. So it's a bit like the dome drawing room in Wimpole Hall, but on a triangular rather than a square plan. Yeah, where that one has these sort of 2 little apsidal niches on either side. This one has one at each corner.
Here it is rendered very much larger again. This is a strange rendition, I think.
Yeah.
The people are drawn in very little.
Yes. It'd be a lot cosier than this.
But a lovely interior and a quite striking and interesting exterior. In this one, the church is lit from within, or in twilight, or perhaps a moon scene. I think that might be the moon.
The 3 churches which he did, there was a programme of church building. There are these periodic programmes of big church building in London, and this one was to celebrate having beaten Napoleon. The Waterloo churches. The government put aside £1 million to build churches.
Which was a fair bit of money.
Yeah. But it took them quite a long time to actually build any. This was in the sort of early 1820s that they're actually getting going with some of them. Soane in the end built 3, And they are kind of mega churches. They're for 2,000 people. They're basically all the same paradigm, which is a really big rectangular sort of box with a massive big nave and two sort of little aisles and also two galleries, so that you could really pack people in.
Rather wide for their height in terms of the box. It's perhaps, I think, 2 to 3 on the front and then twice as long as it's wide, sort of thing.
Yeah. And the corners are kind of reserved for, you have a staircase more or less in each corner, so you can get up and down to the
the first block, the end and the beginning of the block are, I think the end is like vestry and that sort of stuff, and then the beginning is the staircases to get up to the gallery and other bits, and then the body is the middle 3/4 is the church.
But they read as a very pragmatic kind of budget maximizing. I think he takes quite seriously the requirement to get as many people as possible into them. They had to have 25% free seats as well. Just a little reminder of
for not pew renters.
Yeah, normally you had to pay for your seat in church.
Not the church.
No, who's getting the money?
People who funded people who had bought at some point the right to that.
Oh, right. There was it was all secondary market, was it?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That was the landlordism of that time.
It was landlordism in the church, yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. Yeah. Yeah, and you would literally have had a pew with your name on it, wouldn't you? That's the
yeah. And there were I don't know when, I think we're still in box pews, aren't we? Mostly.
Yeah, I think so.
So you had little booths.
Yeah.
So the priest couldn't see if you were sleeping.
But yeah, so they were meant to have a quarter free seats. But I mean, I would guess probably in the gallery, but to get the great unwashed in.
They were always saying, "Oh, we must build huge capacity churches," but I don't think there's ever really been a golden age of mass church attendance in the East End of London.
I mean, the plan goes through lots and lots of little different reconfigurations, but the basic diagram is the same all the way through. And in each of the three churches, which are, one in Marylebone, in northwest of the centre of London, one in Southwark, in the south, and one in Bethnal Green, in fact, about 2 minutes' walk from where we're currently recording. I think Marylebone is the first, and it's certainly the one which has the most design development. They try the most sorts of different things. And then the other two kind of roll out the same paradigm, although they seem kind of increasingly value engineered and increasingly, well, to some extent, a bit more like architecturally interesting as a result. You can perceive, I think, a kind of reduction of the church design, certainly the exterior of the church, to its fundamentals. Like, what's the least you can get away with and still have the kind of grandeur and kind of presence of a proper ecclesiastical monument. But I mean, we should probably talk about Marylebone first. I feel like the thing which he's clearly really going backwards and forwards on a lot is the tower. It has a portico on the front, which is an inset portico, and it has some kind of tower above that to sort of signal its presence on the site. I think there are various things that go on in the design process. It doesn't always have exactly the same orientation that it does now, facing south. In the collection, they've got versions with a massive tower. You've got
this one looks like a stupa.
Yeah.
But looks a bit like, Lutyens in India.
Yeah, it's kind of stupa top, but then the kind of, it's like sort of a round temple. Then there's one with a much sort of smaller, with a kind of expressed higher nave, and then like a really little tower.
It's all pepper pot.
Yeah. And there's one where it doesn't have a tower at all, but it's got two little domes, one above the entrance and one above.
It appears to be in Campania.
Well, they always do. They always do. And then there's some with no towers at all. He has one which is kind of doesn't really seem. I mean, it
looks very Roman.
There's a lot more. It's much more expressed. It's got a kind of big kind of banding across the top, which is a sort of like temple style architrave, and then like a motif with these two little inset columns at either side.
It feels a bit basilicary.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't to me feel like a church at all. This is
well, I mean, here's the thing. We've dealt with quite a lot of church architects over the period.
Yeah,
I don't think Soane was at all interested in Christianity. I don't get any interest in Christianity from his church designs at all. Most of the people who we've talked about their churches, they might have had quite strange views on Christianity, but they were very into it.
They found a way to get into it, yeah.
Michelangelo was very into it. Palladio was into it.
Gaudi,
Hawksmoor into it. Gaudi into it. They're all often eccentric but forcefully Christian people. And I think Soane. I think it was just a different sort of box.
Yeah, they are they're all the same box. They're all this same sort of box design.
This, I think, is my favourite design.
It's cool, isn't it? But it doesn't look anything like a church to me. This I would really struggle to recognise as a church.
Yeah, perhaps that's what's fun about it.
Yeah.
Whereas the other ones feel a bit like...
The domey one is a bit crap. The one with the mega tower, I think, is good, but...
Yeah, funny.
Yeah, and then the inside goes through a sort of similar process of revision, I think much more
Have
clearly.
we got huge plaster rambles?
Yeah, massive plaster roundels. Yeah, so initially I think he has an idea of doing a big barrel vault with kind of dormer windows coming into it, and all of this kind of gradually gets specced down and down. At one point he was going to have these quite interesting sort of roof lights. Which
feels a bit like an exhibition space or something.
Yeah, it's quite cool, isn't it? So this one has a very flat... barrel vault with
diamond shaped roof lights,
and then you end up with basically just like a flat ceiling, and the light actually just comes in through the outer walls, so the nave now doesn't go any higher than the aisles. Very simple, quite open, round arched kind of gallery above, and Doric columns holding up the gallery from below. And then, there's a certain point midway through the project where we get back into style wars. And there is a request that couldn't this church actually be Gothic? And I think this is in 1824 or something. So this is possibly at the same... Is this at the same time as he's also going through select committee hell with Westminster? I think it's around the same time.
Yeah.
And he does just do it. He does like a bunch of Gothic
It's
designs.
funny, if he'd had the same attitude with select committee hell, he might have got a lot further.
Yeah.
I think it's because he really cares about classical styles.
Yeah.
Whereas Gothic, he thinks is just rubbish, so he's happy to just slap that all over the box.
Yeah. I mean, the churches are like towards the more phoned in end of the.
And they've become increasingly so.
Yeah. He does a Gothic design. He also did a kind of Northern Romanesque design apparently, but that one's in the V&A and it's not been digitized. And he does multiple Gothic designs. So there's one with a kind of pointy.
And what does Gothic mean? Gothic means
the windows
doorway
are pointy.
And the windows are pointy, and the banding on the top is replaced with crenellation, and the tower is replaced by a cod Gothic tower.
Yeah.
And everything else remains the same.
This one's a Westminster style one, and the previous one is more of a kind of Salisbury vibe. We've got some kind of fake flying buttresses stuck on here, crenellation. He knows the brief, but his heart is very clearly not in it, and I think he managed to talk them down again, and we end up with a...
I mean, these pictures are literally like, okay.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Sure, I could just swap that out, fine.
Yeah, it'll look rubbish, and...
and I'm going to draw it to demonstrate that to the best of my ability.
I'm going to get the worst boy in the office to draw this, because I'm hoping you're going to change your mind. But they eventually change it back again. Maybe I can just... show a picture of what it actually looks like. So,
and it actually has a stone front.
Yeah, I did have the tower is quite interesting. It's a bit like noughts and crosses or something. The plan. So the corners are like a concavity with a little column either side of it. So there's 8 in total. Each corner is kind of.
Do we call these insulated columns projecting from the corners?
Yeah, I guess. But
it's a hash.
Yeah, it's a hatch. Yeah, it's like noughts and crosses board. The sides are kind of poking out the ends, and you've got little column.
And they've got little things. And on top of that, there's a little tall thin edicule.
Yeah.
With a pointy dome. And it's very tall and thin, the tower.
Yeah. And then the whole front is stone with the nice sort of ionic columns, and then the sides I think are brick, but they preserve the stone on the front. For some reason, this has ended up being a wedding venue, and there are these like rather alarming photos available online of what it actually looks like inside.
Oh, I think yes, this one in a jazzy lighting system.
Yeah,
you can have a big old wedding in there, couldn't you?
Yeah. I mean, yes, they've like walled in. Presumably they did this before it was listed, but they've like walled in the galleries, so that the galleries are places to go and you kind of eat up there and then come down here to boogie
Party.
and smoke hookah pipes or whatever. Yeah, it's a weird one. Yeah, but I think they're making a lot of money, so I guess
You could definitely have a 1,500 person wedding in there.
yeah. Old church is not enormously economically productive, so there you go. I guess. That's
Yes,
something to be said
there
for
are more churches in central London, and in fact London in general, than are strictly needed, I would say. And it's a bit of a quandary as to what to do with them. So I guess this is something you can do.
Yeah. So he also does one in Southwark. He does one, and what's interesting about it is that it's extremely similar. The tower is more modest.
It's almost the same height. It's just
it's kind of
stripped back and smaller, narrower.
In that one, the columns were kind of detached and sticking out, and in this one, they've become quite flat little pilasters, so it's all sort of pushed in. And in this case, now the entire building is brick, except for the 4 Ionic columns going across the
tower,
facade. And the tower, and there is this one kind of band, like a string banding with this kind of Greek decoration going all the way around the sides.
And this is probably the most effective.
It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I think
this is the previous one, but I wouldn't say they've lost a lot
Yeah.
by saving the money here.
No, I think in lots of ways it is actually much nicer, much more interesting. I think that the contrast between the kind of material contrast between the columns and the brick is really enjoyable.
And also the real bulky mass of the church, which is a big old slab of church, and the fineness of the tower is quite fun. The tower doesn't feel like it's at all part of the same body.
Yeah.
It feels like a fine tower stuck on top. It's very Sony, isn't it? With all of these tall, round arched windows, which are very tall at the back.
As in Chelsea, like a little bit inset. In some cases, kind of playing with that sort of insetting recession. But yeah, it's
big old beasts, aren't they?
Absolutely, yeah, really, really large. They could really get a lot of people into them. It's as if he has 2 ideas in his head, and there's an idea about like, this is the way to get the most building for your money. This is like pragmatism, which is it's brick, it's kind of space maximizing, it uses arches, and it gets the most out of its arches at the level of expression, but it's basically very pragmatic. And then you have kind of monumental propriety kind of program, which is like stone, Greek and Roman orders, like classical language. And it's funny, in the churches you sort of see him measuring out how much he can get of one and how much he can get of another, and exactly what the most advantageous mixture is that you can get to kind of deliver the best version of this project for the budget. I find it really fascinating. Because I think that through the different projects that we've looked at as well, you kind of see sort of negotiation, that sort of, let's not call it a dialectic, but between those 2 quite incompatible ideas, like working through, whether it's the National Debt Redemption Office or like in sort of Chelsea and Dulwich, again, like Dulwich is nearly all a brick box. And in the end, he didn't even manage to make the mausoleum stone on the outside, but you can see he really wanted to have that as this kind of little stone thing with the kind of background of this larger brick building for living in.
But still, actually, the brick bit is kind of cooler.
It is cool. I really like this portico.
Yeah, the front facade works for it. It's strange. The front facade feels like it's on a different building
because it's so deep.
Side and rears.
Yeah.
The front facade feels more of a piece.
Big. I think the interior of this one is relatively unchanged, and it's quite.
It looks fine.
Quite nice. Yeah. And then there's poor old St. John of Bethnal Green, which doesn't have a proper portico.
Has basically no stone.
Yeah. I don't know if the portico was always missing on this one, or if it was always. It was always missing. Yeah. There's no stone. The tower is very
it's
squat.
become thick and squat.
Yeah. They have this series of essays about the churches, kind of narrating what's in the drawings, and also, in the case of the churches, bringing in some well-chosen quotations from contemporary criticism. And you can see, you can chart interested, equivocal with All Saints, and then quite strongly against with the Southwark Church, and then And then it describes the tower of the Bethnal Green Church as a monstrous excrescence. Which is like...
Which is funny because I think, in terms of the tower fitting into the building, this one is, this is the weakest church and the most phoned in, sorry. This one is one where the tower at least kind of connects through the building and it feels part of a thing. It's just the whole thing feels very much like a box.
Yeah, it's lost. In the other ones, it feels like they have a proper top. They've got a proper lid on them. This kind of strong horizontal element, which is supported. Whereas in that's become very
almost
weak
all
in the Bethnal Green one.
The bits to make it look interesting.
Yeah,
and what they've replaced it with are all kind of white verticals dividing up the facade. Which I think are plaster, right?
I think so, yeah.
Have you ever... I've never been inside this church.
No, me neither.
It's never open. This one is the one that feels like it's got the least activity.
Well, yeah, a bit of a downer to end on, but it's...
This wasn't his religion.
Yeah. No.
His religion is...
the cult of the...
The cult of ruins.
Yeah, the Roman emperors.
Well, I think it's quite Greek.
Yeah.
It's kind of Greco-Roman ruins. It's Greek bits on top of Roman masses.
He was his own worst enemy in lots of ways. Like, whenever he could get what he wanted, the result is less good. He's very good at working against constraint, and he's very good at making the most of something difficult.
Except that in his house, where he had a lot of flexibility, and he had not a bad amount of money, he actually kind of made more and more constraint for himself and made the space more and more tight and round around itself. The museum bit of the house, which we will get to in the next episode, is an exercise in convolution.
Yeah.
Which was completely up to him. So I think to some extent he must have been aware of it. But I don't know. When he's doing... His fantasy projects aren't good. But I don't know if he had the ability to do them, they would have got better. His method of working is quite tortured. It's extremely iterative. Go through design after design. And generally they got a lot better. The plans on the Soane Museum website, you can really see as some of the schemes... the courts is a great example of this. The plans start not great and they become clarified and clear and work great. So it may just be that he'd not really tried. I don't know. Might be charitable. That view makes the church look good by really emphasizing this horizontal versus vertical.
Yeah.
Big block, tall thin tower, different materials. He's very fond of this large oblong. That shape is almost the shape of the Chelsea Barracks stables, isn't it? Onto that church, where you just see a rectangular facade. So I guess you get that all the way back to the Tyringham Gatehouse. Boxes. It's one of the big shapes.
Thank you very much for listening.
We're going to have one more. It's going to be the museum.
One more, and then we're going to do something else. So thanks for sticking with us. And remember, you can find links to all the sorts of things that you might want to know more about on our website, about buildingsandcities.org. And if you want bonus material, if you want to hear even more, we do periodically release extra episodes on our Patreon, which is also linked on the website. Yeah,
we've got video on YouTube where you can see it with the slides in tandem. How useful!
Yeah, I'd say we're not really what the YouTube algorithm wants to promote.
That's fine. People are watching it. I can see why most people would prefer it in an audio format.
Yeah,
it's slightly more compatible with doing other activities, but
it's
there nevertheless.
It's there if you want to zoom through and find a particular image, and all of that, as we've said, we'll be putting a selection of stuff that we've talked about up on our socials for you to have a look at. That's at _buildings on the usual platforms.
Well, thank you all very much for listening and getting this far through.
Yes, well
My
done.
God,
well done.
Yeah, it will be something else soon.
Extra credit.
I think we're going to do another Arcane, but rather shorter series.
Yeah,
or episode probably.
Yeah, that'll be good.
Bye bye.